Hi, Dave Scotland for cgswot.com and welcome to another tutorial. Today we're going to take a look at multi-sub-object materials in 3D Studio Max, and they're very useful, especially if you're working in a larger pipeline and you have multiple people working on a project. When you create a model in 3D Studio Max, it has to be materialed or textured, and by having a multi-sub-object material for all of the objects within either a character or a more complex model, you can use a sub-object material type to basically include all of the materials in the one material within the material editor. And that way you can send the file, and when they open it up at the other end, it only has the one material associated with it. It's much easier to control your materials and to access them and to keep them organized. So let's get started. I've got this very simple character here, and we'll be using this character in some future workshops for rigging and a little bit of animation stuff as well. But for now, I just want to break it up into some very simple materials, and I'm going to use a sub-object material type. So the hotkey for bringing up your material editor is M. And if we bring that up, you may not see your material editor look quite like this one here. You may in fact look like this, which is the slate editor. Now I'm from an old school 3D Studio Max background, and the slate is a new addition, very similar to the Maya way of using materials, but I find it much easier to use what you have learnt with, and in this instance the compact material editor is the way to go. So you can just switch back to the compact material editor, and at the moment this character has one materials assigned to every object within the character, and you don't necessarily have to do that, but it just helps me when I'm modeling characters to keep a uniform material. So what we're going to do is set up a multi-sub-object material here, and I'm just going to select a new material swatch, click on standard. This brings up our material map browser, and I'm just going to bring up my materials and select the multi-sub object. And double click, and it asks if it wants to discard, and we want to discard old materials. So we go OK. So here's our fresh multi-sub object material, and what I'm going to do with that is start to set up my various materials within that material type. And by default it gives you 10 as the number of materials, but you can literally set that up to, I believe, 99, but it may actually be higher than that nowadays. And you know, that's a very complex material. So we'll start with 10. Now the first thing I like to do is just click on my my swatches here and set up some standard materials. And I'm just setting standard materials for probably about 4 or 5 to start with. And we'll just do one more standard material. So what you would have noticed in that process is a multi-sub-object material allows you to actually set materials up within the sub-object that are various different types. So if I went into this one, I could actually have any of these types of materials: matte shadow, morpher, ray trace, etc. And if I was running V-Ray, I'd be able to use V-Ray materials as well. So I'm not restricted to just a standard material type within the sub-object material. The other thing I like to do is just click on this swatch just to give myself a little bit of color identification as I'm working in the materials, just so that as I'm set them up, you'll be able to see very quickly what these sub-object materials are assigned to on the model. So something like that should be fine for now. And we can now start to get into our geometry. Before I do, just in the material editor here, you can see there is an ID column. ID 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. And what I can actually do is assign material IDs to various polygons on the object. And what we might do is start with the largest object just to illustrate the process. So I'm just starting with this torso geometry, and before we hone in on specific geometry, I'm going to select every piece of geometry in the scene and I'm going to assign my material to it. And that's confirmed up here with the little white corners. And you'll also see that by default there's a whole lot of sub or material IDs that have already been assigned as part of the modeling process, and that's just something that happens as you model. So we need to tidy that up, and in fact we might start with the head because it involves quite a few material IDs. So if I Alt Q, I can isolate that selection. I'm just going to drag that off screen, but this is the little the box that pops up when I Alt Q or isolate selection. Just going to drag it off screen for now, and I'm going to maximize my viewport just so that I can see what I'm doing. Now, what I want to do is actually assign a different material to this glass section here for the eyes, and I'm going to assign that material 5 in the stack. And I might even just click on the swatch and make something a little bit sort of grey, sort of dark grey. But I don't want this exterior material ID to be selected. So if I go into the modify stack and just come down to the edit poly, now this brings up a unique situation. I don't like to assign materials to a model that still has symmetry in its stack because it can create a very large, if I switch the symmetry off, you'll see it's only half of the actual model. And what will actually happen as I start to put materials or textures on this model, I'm going to get a seam straight up the middle of the object. I can't do any asymmetrical or offset materials. So I like to collapse that out of the stack, and be very careful. You only do this when you are happy with the model and you know that you're not going to be doing any more modeling on the character, or if so, very minimal modeling, and there are techniques you can use to do that. So I'm just going to right click and collapse to, and just go OK. And so now I just have my edit poly and my mesh smooth on top. So I'm just going to click on my edit poly. I'm going to show end result by clicking the toggle, and that way I can come in here now and select various polygons. So I'm just going to use the control button to select the multiple polygons in the glass section of the eye piece. Come in here a little bit closer and make sure we've got them all. And if I do a grow, I can make sure that I've got everything. And I think the grow, we're going to shrink that back down because that little fold that was there, I want to keep that with the edge material for the eyepiece. So we can now go down into the stack. In fact, what I like to do is select every polygon in the object, and you can see that every polygon is selected there, and just reset it to the default. And in this instance, I'm going to use number 1, material ID number 1, as the default material. And I'm going to place everything, when we come down to polygon material IDs, I'm going to type in 1 and then hit enter. And you'll see now that it has inherited all of that material ID 1 for every polygon. And that makes it a lot easier to work your way through and then assign specific materials to specific polygons. So there's my eye piece, and I'm going to assign it to material ID 5. And you'll see now that it actually has material ID 5 assigned to it. Now, for the exterior of the eyepiece and for these side designs, and maybe even this design that goes over the top of the helmet or headpiece for our little robot, I'm going to make it all the same material, and in the future I'm going to make it like a brushed metal type material. So I'm going to make that material ID 2. and I'm going to give it a name. We'll rename our ID5 to, let's call it black glass, and then we'll call this one default. We'll probably rename that later to probably the most dominant material for the whole object will probably be this default material. And the second one here we're going to call brush metal. But you'll notice that the actual material names haven't changed, and it is a good idea to just cut and paste, Control C, go into the material and then rename it in the material, and then when you come back up the stack you'll see that it's called black glass as well. Do the same here, Control C and rename it. It's always a good idea to stay organized because other people will potentially be working on this and they will need to know what these materials are. So let's go ahead and create those brushed metal materials. I'm just going through and selecting those polygons, and you'll see that the polygon selection doesn't come all the way to the edge, and that the reason for that is that the geometry has been created to basically have a little fold in it, and we need to make sure that we get that fold in our selection. So I'm just coming around. You don't necessarily have to do this all in one hit. You could potentially, I could get rid of this selection and come back to just the edge here. And what I'm going to do is grow my selection. So if I slide back up here, I think it's more beneficial to slide out my command panel so that I get two command selections, and I get rid of all of the things. I'm not modeling at the moment, so really I just need my sub-object selection tab, and I need my polygon materials tab here. So I can close up everything else, and it just keeps everything nice and tidy for this process. So I'm just going to grow my selection. And you'll see there that we've got some polygons that I don't need, but once I get rid of those, you'll see that I have that area on the side of the helmet that I do need. So I'm just going to apply a set material ID 2, and you'll see if I deselect, I now have that unique material ID on those objects. So I'm going to go ahead now and do the same process for all of those polygons that are associated with material ID 2. Okay, so I've assigned those material IDs to the polygons I wanted selected there, and if I do a quick render, you'll see that we now have those materials on the object. Now I'm just going to come out of isolation mode, and I'm going to highlight both the face mask here and the helmet. And the reason for that is I want a darker material on the face, on the helmet, to sort of sit underneath this face mask. So Alt Q again, we'll put it into isolation mode, and I can select the face mask, and I have a shell modifier in that face mask, and it's not going to worry our materials too much. In fact, we can benefit from that in the multi-sub-object material, and I'll show you how we do that shortly. Now, if you look at the face mask, you'll see that there are actually some cut-out areas here, and that's what I was talking about. I want some sort of dark material to be inside the face mask, and that means it's the helmet that we need to select there. So what I'm going to do is select the helmet, go into my editable poly mode, and start to select polygons within that face mask area, and just make sure that I get that selection. And we don't want those ones, so we can get rid of those. I'm using a combination of control clicking to select multiples and alt clicking to deselect polygons. So just having a little bit of trouble here selecting those polygons that I need. I'm just going to try to get the right polygons here. And I might need to just hide the face mask for now. So I'm just going to hide selected, come back to my face mask, and I'm just trying to get these two polygons here. And I might even spread it a little wider and come right out to the edge of that face mask there. Now at the moment I don't really have a material that I've got in mind for that in the sub-object material, so I'm going to set it to 6. So I'm coming over here, polygon material ID 6, hit enter, and at the moment it's just going to come up as black because it hasn't been assigned an actual material type yet. So I'm just going to click on 6, make it standard, and we'll rename this one to, let's call it black matte. So it's not going to be specular, it's going to be a fairly black material, and I'm going to go ahead and actually give it a little bit of a black colour, get rid of the glossiness, maybe put just a tad of specular, and maybe 5 on the glossiness. Maybe 5 and 5 is going to be fine. I'm going to Control C to copy that name, and then back out here in my sub-object, Control V, just to keep everything nice and organised. So now if I unhide my mask, and in fact I've actually got some layers set up, I'll slide that in, and for the head I should be able to just unhide that object, and there we have it there. And if I render, you'll see now that we get that dark through the mask. Now the mask itself, I'm also going to use that brushed material. So I can go ahead and grab the whole object and all the polygons and put that back to material ID 2. And that way it will also inherit that brush material ID. And just want to switch on my show end result so that I can see my mesh smooth and see how that's actually working. I think that's going to work fine for what we want to do. And at any stage, bear in mind that I can always come back into the sub-object and place some different choices for my polygons. Now, I wanted to show you the shell modifier. It has an actual unique setting in it that allows me to actually override an inner and outer material ID. And at the moment, it's inheriting the material ID from the editable poly that we just set. But if I want the edge of this mask to, and I'll just isolate it, I'll come out of isolation mode and then just isolate Alt Q, just that mask. If I want the edge of the mask to actually have a bit of a black material, but I want the rest to be brushed metal, I can easily just go into the shell modifier, tick the override material ID, and notice it's set to 1 by default, and it's inherited that 1 in our material multi-sub object. And so all of the edges that are created by the shell modifier are now set to 1, and I'm going to set that to 6. So I'm just going to type in 6, and now our mask object has some nice black edges, which is a little difficult to see. Maybe if I slide in here you can see it a little bit better, but it has black edges in and around that material. And then when we come out of isolation mode, we can actually see how that works. And we're getting some nice defining edges. If I rotate around a little bit, you'll see from the side we're going to get some nice definition on that edge there. Now we're also getting, if I come in here and just select the head and rotate around a little bit, see that corner that's, you can just see that little point there. Now I don't really like that, it's going to cause troubles later on. So that's on the head material. So I'm going to Alt-Q to isolate it. And it's this corner up in here that we're getting. So what I actually want to do, this can make a difference if in your mesh smooth settings, you can tick materials, and you'll notice now that it actually separates the polygon selection that we had using smoothing groups and materials. And that gives us, if I flip to a wireframe, you'll see that that's the smoothing group that I had set up in the editable poly. And then when you apply a mesh smooth, it's nice and curved. Well, we can maintain that curve in the material by ticking materials. That also would have had a little bit of an effect up under here. I'll switch that on and off. It's a little hard to see, but it can actually give you a better definition with your sub-object or polygon selections in your material sub-objects. So if I come out of isolation mode now and zoom in there, you'll see that we actually get a little bit of a different feedback there now, and it's going to work nicely for what we want. Give that another little render. So that's the helmet done, and the process for the rest of the model is identical. So basically we can go around, we can select entire objects, and in fact I'll show you this easy quick shortcut. I want this arm socket here, or shoulder socket, to be all brushed metal, which is Material ID 2. Now I could go into the Edit Poly, go into my sub-object mode for polygon, select all of the polygons in the object, and just simply assign a Material ID 2 to it. Looks like it's already got a Material ID 2 on it. But there is an easier way if the whole object has to have a unique Material ID for a multi-sub-object. And that is to just add in the stack above the Edit Poly a Material modifier. And if I click on that, by default it's 1, and you'll see it's now defaulted back to our purple material there. And I can go up through the materials and give it any one of those Material IDs, and it will just make every polygon in the object have a Material ID that is set here. So it can be Material ID 2, and what I can actually do, because this other shoulder socket is a instance, it has inherited that material. But what I can actually do is right click and copy that object's material modifier, and start to look for other areas within the scene, or other objects within the scene that will potentially have that material. So here's one here where they're in the neck area. I've got these 2 cylinders. I'm going to select them both, and actually I'll have to do it one at a time. So select this one, go above the Edit Poly, right click and paste. Do the same with the other one, just above the Edit Poly, right click and paste. And so now both of those objects have that Material ID 2, and it saves a lot of work in this process. And I might just get those neck struts as well. I'll just right click and paste, right click and paste. And I can go through the rest of the model and assign different Material IDs to different objects, either using that method or the sub-object polygon selection method, where we just assign a different Material ID. But the idea is to make sure your entire model is one material, and in this instance it's this multi-sub object, and we'll just rename it. We'll go robot sub-object mat, and that way we can have as many materials as we want. As we start to cut more detail in, we can add new materials and then go through that same method. So I'm going to go ahead now and finish off the model, and I'll show you what it looks like once we've got all of the materials assigned through the multi-sub-object method. Okay, welcome back. As you can see, I've gone through the whole model now and assigned a different material ID for, or a unique material ID to each section of the model, either through the polygon selection mode or through the material, or adding a material modifier to the stack. And you can see here that I end up using 6 materials. So what I'm going to do is actually leave it, I might leave it at 8, and by default it's 10, so I can just go in and set the number and we'll make it 8. And the reason why I've left it at 8 is it gives me a bit of wiggle room, and I can actually add some other materials later on, some more unique materials. And if we give it a quick render, you can see that we've literally got our model broken up, and that's the first step. And now what you do is just simply go ahead and start to specifically design your materials based on those sub-selections. So my default material, rather than be this ugly purple color, I'm going to go for something in the blue range, probably add a little bit of green to it, get it fairly deep, and take a bit of hotness out of it so that it's sort of a blue-grey. I'm going to crank up a little bit of specular and then a little bit of gloss. We can see how that's working there. And probably a little bit less gloss on it. And what I like to do with the, and I'm just showing you one specific material. You can certainly go through all of the other materials and utilize various material methods to get all of the different areas. But I just wanted to show you that we have a lot of power just by going in and specifically editing a material within the multi-sub-object material, and that you just replicate that process. So what I like to do with the with something that is believable and has a real-world feel is to just break up that specular, and I like to use a noise map just in the specular level. Just bring up a noise, and you'll see straight away it gives me a nice sort of noise. And if you switch that to fractal and just give that a bit of a render, see how that's working. It probably needs to go a bit smaller in the size. And you have to bear in mind that we haven't actually applied a UVW map to any of the objects. So for instance, the head here has no UVW map assigned to it yet. So that's a step for another tutorial. I can really quickly show you what I mean by that. I need to apply a UVW map. In this instance, we'll apply, say, a spherical map, and just get it to fit. And not too sure why we're not seeing it there. It seems to be down here for some reason. It's probably because of the, I'm just going to undo that, get rid of it. The reason I think it's set up down there, and you can confirm it, when I click on this head, the pivot point is right down here. So what I'm going to do is go into the hierarchy tab, effect pivot only, I'm going to center to object, and I'm going to align to world. And now when we apply a UVW map, we should get something that's actually up on the model. We'll go spherical, and we'll just get it to fit. And now if I come in here and render that, you should be able to tweak the material to get it to actually work a bit better. I'm just going to go probably down to about 5 and see how that works on the material. Let's see, we're starting to get a breakup now of that highlight or specularity. Pull that down to maybe 3. And that's working pretty well. And if I increase the gloss a little bit on it, we should get a nice sort of broken up noise on that material. Now you have to remember that the rest of the model, if I come in here onto the arm, which also shares that material ID, we're not likely to see that same effect happening because that arm hasn't been given a UVW map. So I would naturally just give it a UVW map, in this instance probably a box, and you should be able to see a little bit more of the effect. If I come in on the edge you'll see we're starting to get that specular breakup on the edge there. And I might just scale that UVW up so that it's uniform. I like to look at the largest number. In this instance, that's 20, and copy it and paste it to the other two dimensions. And that way we're getting a square. Not too sure why it looks like that though. Just going to go fit and copy, paste. That's better. And that way it's a square, much more uniform look for the material. You don't want your materials to come out looking flat and squashed. So basically that would be our next step, is to go through and actually apply UVW map to all of our objects and make sure that the maps or materials are now falling properly on the actual object itself. And then you would go to the next step, which is to actually start to define your materials a lot more. Perhaps you've got decals or labels to go on the robot somewhere, and you would just simply go into that sub-object, say for the body, and I could open up a bitmap and apply a label or some sort of graphic that I do in Photoshop. So what I'll actually do is I'll leave it there, and we'll probably pick up in another tutorial where we use a little bit of bitmap mapping or non-procedural mapping, and we'll take it from there in a future tutorial. But that's multi-sub-object materials and how we can apply them to individual polygons and to unique objects within a larger geometry. That's it from me. Until next time, bye for now.